You're listening to Were You Still Talking?
They pump out your blood and they pump in a new batch of blood, and all of it is the blood of children.
All the big stars are going to be on TV now. I mean, it's just the way it's going. Your role, I think, will be played by Brad Pitt.
What'd you wear? I wore my loincloth wrapped around my feet.
Are you going by John today?
And that's absolutely true. You feel it in every cell in your body.
Yeah, you can bend the truth and bend the visualizations no matter what your political affiliation.
You could have an alpaca. A girlfriend's daughter recently got married, and they had llamas or alpacas at the wedding.
A recording room. They recorded a couple songs in the kitchen of Rumbo.
So, wait, you microdosed before this, right?
What? Hey, welcome back. This is Joel Albrecht again, and as you heard in the intro, you are listening to Were You Still Talking? Today on the show, another amazing guest, blowing my mind. This is Gordon Firemark. He has practiced media and entertainment law since 1992. He's often referred to as the podcast lawyer, trademark, and is himself a producer and host of Entertainment Law Update podcast, which is really awesome. I've caught a couple episodes on YouTube. Extremely helpful if you're a podcaster or if you just are curious about entertainment law, because it's pretty fascinating. He also does the More, Better, Faster podcast, which offers insights and advice to creative professionals and businesses who want to achieve more, better, faster. Makes sense. Gordon's the author of the podcast blog and New Media Producers Legal Survivor Guide and creator of several online courses for creatives, a lot of which is available for free on his website, which I'm sure we'll mention a few times in the podcast and will be in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm great. And in my spare time, I practice law.
And you practice law.
Yeah. So thanks for having me, Joel. I'm really glad to be here.
And the more important part, not only do you practice law, but you learned law from University of Oregon. Yes.
No, my undergrad was at
University undergrad. What am I thinking?
I learned radio, TV, and film production at Oregon, and then the law came later.
Oh, law came later. Okay. So that was kind of one of my first questions. Well, the first one is, Did you shave your head before or after the Joe Rogan podcast?
I started shaving my head in 1997.
Oh, wow.
So Joe Rogan was still doing news radio or something back in those days, and he had a fringe of hair around his head. But no, I decided I was bald on top and almost not mullet exactly, but wearing it pretty long in the back, playing around in the entertainment industry, and I realized I looked much older than I was. And now I'm as old now as I looked then. So,
but now you don't look that old.
I think it's a more virile look. Let's put it that. My wife doesn't agree, but
well, it's definitely the style these days, and you look a lot younger than I thought you were. And my other thing, which always amazes me, because I think it's a really hard area. Well, you were in the entertainment business. What drew you into doing entertainment law?
Well, that's an interesting story. You know, I got interested in entertainment, theater business and stuff like that, always behind the scenes stuff. When I was very young, 5 years old, kindergarten, got exposed to the theater at school with the K through 12 and the high school kids doing their musicals, and that turned me on. I got interested in doing sound and lights and all that kind of stuff. Did that all through high school and into college at Oregon. Started as a theater major. That was a performance program, and I was never wanting to be on stage. So I shifted over to journalism, and then from there, that wasn't quite right for me either, so I went into radio, TV, and film. And in my senior year there, I had sort of wrapped up my major requirements, and I was taking some graduate level classes, government regulation of the media policy and management, courses like that, really exciting stuff. And the professor pointed out that I was at the top of that class among all these grad students, and I seemed to have an aptitude for regulatory and legal and understanding the concepts, and said, you should think about going to law school. I was in the middle of applying for film school, graduate school, and I sort of laughed it off. But what the heck, I'll take the test and I'll send in a few applications. And I didn't get into film school, but I did get into law school.
Oh, that's great.
Still decided I was going to take some time off and work in the industry. Came back to LA, and this was 1988. Mm-hmm. Well, I got a job working in in cable television, sports production, really wanted to be in the movie and television industries in the entertainment side. And just as I was sort of ready to make a move, you may remember the Writers Guild of America went on strike. It was a big strike in late '88. And it was scheduled to last, everybody was expecting it to be a 6-month to a year-long strike, and it was. So I thought, I'll use this opportunity to go to law school and hedge my bets a little bit and find a way to make a bigger living, a better living or something. Not really thinking strategically about it, but if you're going to do entertainment law, when the unions go on strike, you don't have any work to do and you go on vacation. So that's been my career for about 30 years now. And, fortunately, I found an aptitude for it and I enjoy it. And I love helping creative people to sort of understand the business side of things as well and make the most of it for their careers.
Yeah, and it's always seemed to be something that's, I don't know, maybe more difficult or just less seems, I don't know what it is. It seems that creatives often have a hard time with the business end. I know I worked as a clerk at a law office for a long time, so it was a nonprofit law office, which is even more bizarre. Everyone has a hard time with getting their head around legal ideas, and what they need to do legally.
Yeah, it's really that sort of left brain, right brain kind of thing. And, creative people are interested in the creative and the more in the moment excitement of things, I suppose you could say. And we lawyers tend to be able to take that longer, sort of more linear view and an approach to things that, ticks all the boxes. Maybe it's boring and mundane of us, but it's necessary part of things. And I think what gives me my uniqueness or, the cachet in my industry is that I bridge the gap. I'm really a good translator between the two sides of that industry.
Oh, right. That makes sense because you started out in the trenches, as it were.
And I'll tell you, most of us that practice entertainment law are, I won't say frustrated, but came from being musicians or artists or filmmakers or writers or whatever. And many still do some of that on the side, but we cultivate both sides of the brain. So.
Right. And did it have anything to do with wanting to make a living?
I think that was more about my parents' fears about me making a living than about my own.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. So the main video I watched was about, and this is something that I've really been falling down about. Those are my wrong notes. About getting, this is for any podcasters listening or anyone who's just interested in the back end of podcasting, getting a release for people on a podcast. I think that seems to be something that is very misunderstood, it wasn't misunderstood by me. I was maybe ignoring it a little bit. I was getting releases more when people were coming in the studio, and then when this thing happened, everything changed, and I have not kept up like I should. So, just number one, how important is it to have a release?
Well, this is really my crusade, Joel. I've been advocating for the use of a release for everybody who has a guest on their show. It's not just podcasters. It's, for live streams and for any kind of program or content that you create where you have other people coming and helping you in any way. Really, you should have something on paper that says that you own what they help you create and that you have the right to do it and they're consenting to being recorded and filmed or whatever, and that they're not expecting compensation and aren't going to come after you later on because you edited it in a way that makes them look goofy or whatever, although sometimes that's inevitable. So in fact, and the trick of it is it's possible to do this orally. I'll say right now, Joel, you hereby have my consent to record my voice and permission to use this recording in any and all media now known and hereafter devised in perpetuity without any obligation to compensate me or to give me a right to, pre-publication review or anything like that. Now, if you can remember all of those things to ask every single time, fantastic, do it. But I think that getting it in writing is the safest way to make sure you tick all the boxes. The lawyer ticking boxes.
That is That's really interesting because I've been getting a simple release. I didn't use all those words, but this was one of my questions. Could I just read the release if I haven't had time to send it to them? I want to go live in 2 minutes. I can just read the release on the recording that we're doing, and that also works.
Yeah, if you've got a proper script for that read, then I think that works. And in fact, I offer a free podcast guest release to people for a download, and in the packet that you get when you download is the script for an oral release as well. Although I think it's better. It's a little more formal, a little more solemn of an act to sign something on paper, or even just to click the box on a digital signature kind of thing. But anything is better than nothing. So yeah, I think the oral works.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it seems like you said in your video, it's really better to get a physical signed copy, which I'm sure it is, but sometimes with the time constraints, from booking to getting someone on, especially with today's mail, actually right now, it's tough to get mail that fast. So the online signature is still viable,
digital
right?
signatures are great. In fact, as you may have noticed when you booked me for this appointment, I have a form that's built into the calendar booking page. We had a little glitch with our calendar booking, but there is a form and a checkbox. And so even that is a manifestation of the intent to be bound by the terms of the thing that you've just read. So digital signatures are a valid thing. And, as I said, anything is better than nothing. Wet ink on a piece of paper, I think, is something we will see the end of before too long. We're in a digital age now. So
it's interesting you say that because the last, 3 or 4 years I was working as a clerk, almost all signatures from any side of it were done with online
there are a few
sites.
Industries that are still sort of frightened about it. The medical industry is they're still using fax machines. But
yes, and they're still taking your temperature and going, "You're fine."
Yeah, right.
You're fine.
But a few other, the real estate industry, they still like to have a formal closing ceremony almost when they make a sale of a property. And I think some of that is partly just theater.
That makes sense. Well, it's also they give you a book. They give you a book and say you should read this, and it's like, oh. And every time I've said, yeah, I should read it. I haven't yet, but
yeah, the only time anybody reads those things is when they're upset about something and looking, can I sue?
Right, and then it's a little too late. It's a little like, oops. Well, I could actually talk about releases all day long. It's really interesting to me. The other thing that I find really confusing, is, and there's so much online stuff now. Everyone's got a YouTube channel, and so wearing logos on your on your video, on your podcast, guilty. How are people gonna sue you for that? Ask you to take that podcast down? I don't want you talking about turtles with my shirt on. What are the rules there? What is the legal?
Two different questions. One is, can they? And the other is, will they? On the can they side, they can. If you're using their brand, their logo, their artwork, whatever, as a, seeming to be an endorsement or something like that, they can say, hey, stop it. Don't do that. Whether they will or not really is going to depend on, is there something you're doing in your live stream, on your video, in your film that is disparaging or damaging to the reputation of that brand? So, it's one thing for just someone like myself. I sometimes wear a T-shirt with someone's logo on it, or I had a Baby Yoda T-shirt on a few days ago.
Oh yeah,
I went live and I got a bunch of compliments about it. And I'm sure Lucasfilm doesn't care about this entertainment lawyer talking about boring legal stuff to his 17 followers with the thing. But if I had a million people watching me as I broke into the Capitol building, or let's not get political, or just did something stupid, put somebody's life in danger, put somebody's reputation in question, something like that, then they would say, oh yeah, that follower of ours is disparaging our brand. We better not allow that kind of thing. And so you've seen a lot of film production in the documentary space and also in the entertainment space, sort of blur things out when that kind of stuff is happening. I would say that's an abundance of caution in most instances, and it's usually some lawyer like me watching that film going, probably don't want Coca-Cola feeling like they're somehow endorsing this bad behavior by that idiot on the screen.
Okay. That's interesting. So that's kind of a, you're better
and yet
off.
Everybody knows it's a Coca-Cola logo on the shirt, right?
Right. Well, it's like I sometimes wear a T-shirt with a little swoosh on it. I don't know what brand that is. Some kind of little swoosh.
One of those Oregon-based brands.
One of those Oregon used to be.
Something to
it's
do
not
with athletics.
Literally anymore. It's
right,
offices in Oregon.
Right. They but that is also, if they're going to put it on a shirt like that, it's one thing when it's just over the breast pocket a little bit, a tiny little logo like a polo horse or an alligator. It's another entirely when it takes up the whole front of the shirt. And in trademark law, we deal with whether or not it's ornamental versus whether it's being used as a brand identifier. But
that's really, see, that was another question. That was what I was leading to. If you're just wearing a shirt with a small logo on it, so that's far less likely to be a problem.
Right.
You'll be. Is that my phone? It can't be my phone. I don't have any. Oh, sorry. If you're listening to the podcast, it is my phone, but it's ringing out there. Great. Nice. Never mind. But I see what's happening. I froze for a second because it was ringing on my computer. I did. I turned that off once. I got to put that on my checklist. If you have a podcast, remember to have a little bit or not. I'll leave it. Oh, come on. I'll leave it in there. That's the fun stuff. Yeah, there you go. Oh, love it. Was I still? Now I'll have to. I should make a note though because it might be glitchy.
Your audio on this end was coming through nice and clean. Everything's good. So
okay, we're good then. We are good. Now, where was I? I was talking about logos. I meant to say this at the beginning. I really appreciate the work you're doing, the videos you're doing, and you do provide some free services on your website. You're taking it to Facebook. It's really appreciated by myself, and I'm sure by other people, because it's very needed. It's really good to have someone answering questions and someone available to answer questions, if need be. It's hard. I know it's kind of hard to find someone. It can be hard to find someone in your field. Like, I don't know of any in this area.
Well, there aren't too many actually. That's one of the things we congregate in a couple of small enclaves, I guess you could say. It's one of the things about my podcast actually. Is I do a show about entertainment law. We do a deep dive into the cases and news of the month. We do a monthly show, and people get all uptight about their numbers in the podcasting space. Well, I've only got 500 downloads per episode, or even 40 or 50 downloads an episode, and I'm really getting depressed that I'm not having a bigger impact and more people listening. And I realized a year or so ago that our number of downloads compared to the total number of people in the world who practice or care about the field of entertainment law is we are probably about half of those people are listening to our show every month.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it.
And the fact of it is, it's a good audience of people that many of whom I know and I care about. But if you were doing a show about, your favorite meatloaf recipes, and you had 30 people show up and listen to you, and every week you do a new recipe, and every week 30 people show up and listen. Think about what it would be like to have a room full of 30 people listening to you for half an hour every week while you stood on a stage and talked, or an hour or whatever. And if you've got 500, that's a good-sized room full of people listening to what you have to say. You can really have a meaningful impact with a small audience if they're intensely interested in what you're talking about. And I think that's the real promise of podcasting. But just back to what you were saying about my putting myself out there and giving away a lot of information and content, it is altruistic in a sense because I'm here and I'm on a mission. My intention and goal is to help 10,000 creative podcaster types and other media folks as well in the next few years. And one of the ways that I want to help them is by giving them access to knowledge and information. And so it's altruistic in that sense. I'm happy to share and give knowledge because knowledge is power, but also it demonstrates my expertise and my affability, connectability. People know, like, and trust, and so it does drive business into my office, and so it's good for me while it's good for everybody else too. So thank you for mentioning it and for appreciating it, but it works for me very nicely. Thank you.
Well, and that's good, and it's also kind of a lesson to others that I've seen this lesson repeated many times, but it's a really good way to drive business. It's a great way to get people yet another way. I mean, I've heard this a lot about podcasting since I started. Yeah. Podcasting has more, the podcasting space, I started about a year ago. It's more than doubled since I started, because something happened right when I started. I guess it was me. Probably they saw what I was doing. The 10 people. Well, yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, okay, but a big part of this push, and it's true with where I found you as well. The website I found you on. A big part of this is, well, if you have a business, you should have a podcast. Me as more of an trying to do it as entertainment, informational. Not so much promote your business, although I'm happy to promote your business if you're doing something like you're doing. It's kind of wild because for one, it's like if you don't love podcasting, you don't need to be in the space. Right. That's not really what podcasting is about. But I totally see the other side of it now, that people are really feeling pressured to jump in there and and do it because it helps their business. But it goes back to those numbers. You were talking about 500 people being a good number. That's a really good number. I had Rob Walsh on my program, who's, one of the main people at the
Libsyn.
At Libsyn, and he has his podcast. So every week, if you listen to that, he goes down the numbers, and they are one of the biggest podcast aggregators in the business. So their numbers make a lot of sense. If you have 1,000, you're better than half of the podcasts out there. Yeah. And that sounds like a very small number, but I started thinking of it like you, in terms of size of room. 30 people, I've played drums for a long time. If you're in a small club and you have 30 people, it looks like at least there's people out there. If you're in a small club and you have 100 people, you've got a nice, you pretty much have a packed house. Sure. If you're in a club with 500 people, you're not in a club anymore. You're in a theater. Yeah. So, or a convention center or something. So that's kind of the way I look at it. I'm just trying to get to the point where it's like I'm performing in a theater, and that's the first goal.
Right. Yeah, 100 people is the number of people who attend a big wedding.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. Right. Right. It's a good amount of people, and people should, if you're getting to, for one, you shouldn't look at your numbers. Although saying that, I always do, because that's how some of us are. Yeah. But if you're doing it, you can't, I'm learning as I go, still learning that if you're doing it for numbers, it's just the wrong reason, just do it. I'm doing it more and more because it's really, really fun. I get to meet interesting people, and I get to connect to lawyers that I might need in the future. That's important. That's far more important.
It's interesting. Another thing, just since we're talking about my goal to help people, 10,000 people and so on, my theme or word for the year is impact, having an impact. And, when you think about it, even when you have those 30, if you have 5 people listening to what you say and you make a difference in one person's life, that's impact. It may not be a giant cascading impact, but you've achieved something. If you talk somebody out of taking a dangerous action, or using a drug that they shouldn't use, or exposing themselves to some kind of a risk, or you talk them into taking a risk that turns out great for them, that's impact. And so we it's easy to focus on the numbers without fully putting them in context. And for me, I think that context is really what matters. So many of us are, if you want to make money doing a podcast, well, first of all, think it over a second time, because unless you've got millions and millions of downloads, making real money, it's going to be challenging. I mean, I'm here to help people who want to and are doing so. But if that's your main goal with starting a show, I think you're maybe a little misguided. But what you're saying about everybody, not everybody needs to be in podcasting. The fact is, there's so many different ways of getting a message out now. So many different, social channels. You know, hey, I'm going to be really realistic here. I use Instagram a little bit. It's not my jam, and I'm just not that excited about creating content for Instagram. And don't even ask me to go on TikTok, right?
No, I'm not staying. That's what I haven't touched. For one, I'm not a very good dancer.
And yet there are marketers out there who say you have to be on TikTok, you have to have a podcast, you have to do video, you have to be on Instagram, you have to tweet. And the fact is, pick a couple things, and the ones that feel right, do them, and do them well, and attract an audience, and have your impact. And don't worry about all the other crap.
I think that's really good advice. I recently, I guess I was bored. I recently did a conference about influencers, and I'm not really trying to be an influencer, but if you have a podcast, there's going to be some good information in that kind of seminar. And this was a seminar from some of the big, I mean, these people are huge. They have millions of followers. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the way they did, several of them talked about, well, I didn't try to do Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and, I didn't do that. I said, okay, what I do works here, on whatever media platform it was. Yeah. And they totally said, so how does that platform work? Like, how do I make that work for myself? And so I think that's a really valid point, that focusing on that platform, like obviously for Joe Rogan, YouTube worked.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't hurt that Joe Rogan, as Dave Jackson, one of the podcasting legends really, says, it doesn't hurt that Joe Rogan started his career in stand-up comedy in the early 80s. And he built up a following as a comedian, a comedy writer, an actor. And then he was a stupid game show host on a stupid TV show.
Oh, right.
Fear Factor, right?
Yeah.
But then when you're on an NBC game show every week for 5 years or something like that, you have a big audience. And he was able to leverage that when he said, okay, I'm going to go do my thing now. A lot of people said, "Ooh, I'm curious about that. What's that all about? Oh, that's really cool." And it's refreshing, his approach to things.
Right.
At the risk of
refreshing
tarring him
that's
with the brush.
That's a way to put it.
He's a populist. He says what's on his mind. He says what people are thinking.
Yeah.
And for good or bad. And I think he's a very smart, astute, media savvy person. And so he's made the most of it. But he started with a giant following, and that's the key.
Well, it's interesting because in talking to a couple different people, he did not. He actually started with a pretty small following and he didn't care. I mean, if you look at
his name,
people knew his name. Oh, absolutely, yes.
He was a known celebrity.
But it did take years for his podcast to start to go, and once it started to go, he dumped his soul into it. Once he saw that, this is a thing, then he really put some energy into it. But people should know, it did not start out with 1 million downloads.
No, but the point is he focused on the thing. I mean, he's doing it's a downloadable podcast, but he's doing it on YouTube so people can see what's going on. He picked 2 media and went for it. One of the teachers that I have studied with in the internet business arena talks about, if you're stranded on a desert island and you have to get back to the mainland, build one bridge and focus your energy on building one bridge. If you try to build 7 of them, you're not going to get there anytime soon. Build one. When you get there, then build the other one on the way back, And
I love that analogy. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it really makes a lot of sense.
Better yet, build one, get over there and buy a speedboat.
Yeah, exactly. Get something easier. I would never thought of that. Yeah, no one builds 3 life rafts. They just build one. Yeah. That's a very, very good analogy. I like that. I'm going to go to my notes because I had some other.
Yeah, should we talk about the law?
Very important. Yeah, we could. I mean, see, this is what it's a conversation.
This is what I love talking about all this philosophy and theory and.
Yeah. And isn't that law? Oh, that's another one of my things that I like to always point out. Well, I'll ask you I'll form it in a question.
Sure.
The law is, a lot of people these days are quoting the Constitution, or they think they are. Mm-hmm. They aren't necessarily. And they will talk about a law and that's it. Yeah. This is the law. Mm-hmm. But the law really doesn't work that way, does it? As a lawyer, there's...
Yeah, I mean, there are some components of law that are relatively fixed and stable and not changing. I mean, you talk about, the concept of freedom, though. We say we have freedom of speech. Well, that's an amorphous concept, and it varies depending on what the content of that speech is. It's not supposed to all the time, but you're free to say what's on your mind. But if it's false and it hurts somebody's reputation, they can sue you. If it's inciting violence, again, I'm getting political, and the climate right now is just leading me there.
Oh, I thought you were being completely obscure. I didn't know that was. Is this political?
But there are limits to our freedoms, and we as a society have decided and agreed that there are going to be some boundaries. If not, why have a constitution at all? Just, hey, anything goes. Do what you want. Kill who you want.
Right.
Steal people's stuff,
Right.
Whatever it is. Covet thy neighbor's wife if you feel like it. Talk about the old law, right? Thou shalt not.
Yeah, I was referring more to how it can be interpreted. I mean, what you're talking about is, I think people completely misunderstand. Even network media had a lot more free speech 20 years ago than they have now, because now they're owned by corporations that want to, point them in a certain direction. So whatever network it is, they have less free speech than they did 20 years ago. 50 years ago, it was very difficult to say certain things on television. Things that we say on TV now, you could not say, or it wouldn't make air. And that's the difference with media. Any Yahoo could have a podcast, right?
Yeah, part
and
of
say
that
whatever
is that
he
television
wants.
50 years ago was, 3 major companies, and there were 5 stations max in any given city. And so you were using a scarce public resource, the airwaves, to make television. So the government was justified in regulating it. And they still do regulate those airwave-based television stations. But there are so many other ways to get your message out and across now. And we don't need to regulate that because, the public square got a lot bigger. And it was, anybody who wants to can put a soapbox up and start shouting their message. You may not always get anybody to listen. But again, there's your 30 people in the room, right?
Right. I guess where it gets tricky, and it's good to have a lawyer on to ask this, when you're, if you go on network TV and you talk disparagingly about, a famous actor or something, that person can sue you.
Yeah.
Whereas going on YouTube and doing that, it seems to be much more difficult for the person to take action. They still can. Okay.
They can still sue you who said it. What they can't do is sue YouTube.
Okay,
YouTube is just the intermediary.
That's a big difference.
That's what that Section 230 that people are talking about a lot in the media these days. That is actually the provision in the Communications Decency Act of 1990. I want to say it's pretty old, or 1999 maybe. Anyway, the principle is, we want to keep companies like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Parler and all the others immune from these lawsuits so they can flourish and thrive and create that bigger town square environment where everybody has a voice and everybody can speak. And so we will still allow a plaintiff to go after someone for the words they themselves utter, but we're not going to hold the intermediary channel, the ones that, the people who put out the soapbox, responsible for that. And another analog to that is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act creates a carve-out for companies like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook when they have user-generated content that is infringing of somebody else's copyright. As long as they have a policy of taking it down upon demand and then letting the two parties fight it out, they themselves won't be liable for the infringement. Again, it allows those companies to grow and prosper. Now, all that started in the early 2000s when the internet was a relatively new thing. Al Gore had just invented it, right?
Yeah.
And for those younger listeners, Al Gore didn't invent the internet. He just said that he did.
And technically it had been around 50 years when he said that, but
But anyway, so the idea was, here was this new thing and we want it to grow. We think it's a good thing. It's open communication. It's good for free speech. as long as we allow it to really be free and make sure these companies don't get sued out of existence over the first time they say someone says something bad about someone.
Right. And I mean, just to kind of wrap this up, put a bow on it, these are all, we keep saying these companies. Now that is the big difference. I mean, that's the big gotcha. Yeah. It's a company. If they decide they don't want your show on the air, it's entirely up to them and no one else, right?
Yeah. And, it's interesting. Companies have rights of free speech just like other human, natural-born citizens.
Thanks, Ronald Reagan. Yes, I understand.
Well, you know what? It's actually the Supreme Court made the ruling in the Citizens United case, so it's a little more recent than Reagan. But we think of it as a money in politics case. But what it really says is that companies spending their money is an act of speech. And they are free. We can't limit their right to spend their money on political messaging if they want to.
Right. But
other things.
It still started somewhere.
Yeah. No, it's definitely the Reagan era deregulation that led in that direction. But, it's now back to that concept of the law, almost etched in stone because the Supreme Court said it.
And that's what's interesting is that if it goes that far, that's how the law is going to get decided. They're going to make a decision based on, partly based on their opinion of the law, right?
Well, and their political ideology or at least social ideology and those kinds of things. And, the good news is nothing they say really is etched in stone. After all, separate but equal was a principle established by the Supreme Court in the 1920s or so, the 30s, until the 50s when Brown versus Board of Education came along and said, not so much. So it does change, it does evolve, and we as a society grow as a consequence.
We sure hope. We try. The growth
That's the dream, anyway.
That is the dream. That's the true American dream. I lost my notes. One moment here. Yes, this is a good one. Do you have like maybe a favorite or teachable moment about? I'll stick to podcasts because I know you do a lot of other kind of law, which I'm also going to ask you about. But is there a favorite time or situation in podcasting that you were involved with that is important for people to maybe think about?
A favorite moment or time? That's a really tough question, Joel.
I'll say case then. Well, let me narrow it down. A case.
Cases. What's interesting is there aren't that many big cases in the podcasting space. The patent case by I can't remember the name of the company now that claimed they invented podcasting and patented the technology and went after Apple and a bunch of bigger podcasters. The moment that was overruled and determined that no, their patent was invalid, that's a big important moment in podcasting. But did it ever have a real impact on the average podcaster? I would say probably not. I think that the real beautiful moment in podcasting is the actual invention of the RSS feed and the ability to do it. It took a while for the technology to get inexpensive enough for just anybody to spend a few $100 on a microphone and the bandwidth to make it work. And the more recent, one of the big cases was a couple of years ago now, but the show was called S-Town, and it was about
I love it.
Yeah. So that was
my first podcast.
Oh, is that right? The one
first one I listened to, and that hooked me.
So the backstory of that is that the fellow who was sort of the subject of the show had invited the producers to do a story about something completely different, and they found him to be much more interesting than the story he was pitching them, and they asked him, we'd like to do a show about you, and they didn't get a release from him, they didn't get anything signed, they didn't do any paperwork, but they made the show, and in the course, during the time they were making the show, he actually committed suicide, and his estate came along and claimed that they were violating his right of privacy and right of publicity by making this podcast about him and featuring his voice and story and so on. And that's what we call the right of publicity in the legal field. And they ended up finally settling about a year ago, I think. But
wow, that's, I mean, this, of course, the most surprising thing to me about that story is that was NPR. This is not, these are not small podcasters out there.
They were actually people who had worked at NPR, who still did work at NPR, but it was separate from the network, just to be really
I didn't
clear.
realize that.
National Public Radio was not the producer of that show.
Oh, I always thought they were the producer of that show.
But they all worked on the show, Ira Glass's show. I'm blanking on the
This
title.
American Life?
This American Life.
This American
So that's
Life.
where they all trained, and they were the same, many of the same people who worked on Serial, which was a giant success. It really, I think that was the springboard for podcasting as a medium for many audience members. But yeah, so here were these trained journalists in the radio field coming to this different medium. And I want to emphasize, it is a different medium than radio. Lots of folks come out of the broadcasting world saying, I was a radio host for 20 or 30 years, and I never once needed a release from one of my guests. And guess what? That's right, it's radio. You open your mic and you talk and you say it and you get your guest and you have the conversation and you turn it off, and 4 hours later, it's gone. The show is no longer it's ephemeral is the term. Mm-hmm. And so the harm that can come from that is how many people were actually listening at the moment you said those things, how many people had a recording going. There's an air check recording or something like that, but most of the time it never gets replayed, or if it does, it's once in a blue moon. Podcast is an on-demand evergreen medium, and so the rules are a little different. We have to be careful. In the music arena, it's also very different. Radio stations pay a license to an organization called ASCAP, and another one to BMI, and another one to CSAC and GMR here in the US. And in other countries, it's different organizations, but the same principle that gets them a blanket license to play any music they want on their air. And they're supposed to keep records and track what songs are played and so on, but that's it. If you're podcasting, it's not a live performance of the music, it's a recording. So you're making a copy of the song and you're incorporating it into a larger program, so you're making a derivative work, and you're distributing it to people. They're downloading it as well as just listening ephemerally. So it's much more than merely what you get in broadcast radio. And those are fundamental parts of copyright law: the right to make, distribute, perform works of copyright, so and make derivative works. So it's very different.
That's an interesting point, because you see a lot of people questioning why their YouTube video is taken down. I mean, I only use the song for 3 minutes or whatever it is. And it's like, I'm a musician, so I understand. It's like if you didn't have permission to use a song, it makes no difference. And that's because of David Bowie and a couple of those people. They actually went to court on whether or not you can use any part of their song, and I'm pretty sure they won, because now YouTube itself takes down a lot of it seems. Can people go after YouTube for that? Because it seems like they're policing it a lot more.
Well, so the reason that they are policing it is that it's in their best interest to do so. Legally speaking, I don't think they have to, unless they have sort of what we call red flag knowledge that there's infringement going on. So the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, that DMCA I was talking about, the takedown process, says that if they have a mechanism in place for a copyright owner to say, hey, someone's using my stuff on your site, they have to take it down in a prompt manner, and then give the posting party an opportunity to argue, well, it should stay up. And then they have to put it back up, but then the fight is between the owner and the infringer. If they don't take it down, or if they don't have a good policy in place, or they don't have a way of identifying repeat infringers, then they can be exposed. Their safe harbor is taken away. And so YouTube was the defendant in a very long-lasting lawsuit brought by Viacom and a few other plaintiffs. And I think it went on about 8 or 9 years. And, many, many, many millions of dollars in legal fees alone. And that was sort of the reason that they developed their Content ID system, so that they would be able to identify those repeat infringers and the hot ones that are obviously infringing. But do they have a legal obligation? There's some question in my mind about whether they would still have the safe harbor or not if they didn't implement those technologies. But part of it is also that the music industry has agreed. I think it may be settlement also, now that I think about it. The music industry has agreed, hey, if your system identifies a song, that's a way we can monetize. You can pay us for the use of that music. If that's a sponsored, if there's ads running against that video, hey, take the money and give us a piece of it. And so
right.
Therefore, now too is to let's identify the opportunity to make a little money.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense. The other thing, podcast, good or bad. Oh, the other thing I wanted to touch on, which I think is, which I questioned from the very beginning, people doing theater performances on Zoom. There is some question about whether or not they mean to pay royalties. I mean, is there a question, or is it just that people are forgetting?
I would use the word ignoring.
Ignoring, okay.
They're not forgetting. Now, many of them may not have realized it. I mean, let's face it, a lot of amateur theater companies start up and say, oh, we're going to do a production of The Music Man. Let's do it. And they never think to ask, oh, where do we get the rights to use The Music Man and to do this? And it's probably a bigger problem in the straight play arena, where you can get a copy of the text of a play pretty easily if you don't need the sheet music and all the other materials that you normally would rent from the rights holders, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's ever been a question that a play or a musical is a work that's protected by copyright law. And I think what's really the issue is people not thinking about the fact that when you do a performance on Zoom or anywhere else, what you're doing is making a use of that copyright that belongs to the owner of the copyright. And you're supposed to get a license. You're supposed to pay. Now, many of these Zoom calls, don't have, but again, 10, 20, 30 listeners. So who really cares? But some of them get pretty big, or they get recorded and then they're published on YouTube or some other place. And now you've got a real problem because you've made an unauthorized performance and recording of that copyrighted play or musical. And people are getting better about it, and there's some amazing creative work happening in there. And I think the owners of copyrights are being pretty understanding and even forward-looking about how to license these things. But you do have to go ask and make a deal.
Yeah, it's always curious to me because, any video, as we all know, any video could go viral. So you might have been thinking you were doing something for 10 people, and suddenly it's 1 million people overnight for some unexplained reason, even without a cat in the video. But usually, and the other thing that's always confused me, I've always been a little confused about this, is parody. They probably paid for the rights, but recently there was a YouTube remake of The Princess Bride, and it had, name actors. Obviously, millions of people were going to see it. I assume they paid for it, but could that also have been? I mean, they were just doing it at home, with their own cameras and editing it together. It was really brilliant, but could that also be considered parody? And does parody have different obligations for getting rights?
So what I understand about that particular production is that it was the same people from the original production that were behind the making of this pandemic version, we'll call it, of The Princess Bride, which I haven't seen. I really should. I mean,
brilliant.
And Rob Reiner, the director of the film, was involved in the making of that production.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize, because it was, to see the whole thing was a fundraiser. You can see clips of it online, but to see the whole thing was a fundraiser. So that makes sense.
But were it not authorized by those people, would it be a parody? That's a hard question. So to explain parody, we have to go backwards a little bit and talk about the First Amendment and how it conflicts with copyright law. Copyright law is a law that says you can't make copies of certain things. Well, copying things is speech, isn't it? And free speech says Congress can't make a law that abridges your free speech rights. So Congress made a law called the copyright law, which is also required under the Constitution. Copyright is actually contemplated in the Constitution. Talks about preserving the rights of authors and inventors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
For those who are interested, it's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution. Talk about a geeky thing to know off the top of your head.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Do you have Do you have a photographic memory? Or
No,
you
I just teach it. So I
study
have
a
to
lot.
say
Oh,
it
you
a
teach
couple
it.
times a
Okay.
semester.
Okay.
Anyway, so that idea is there's this conflict. So over the course of a century of jurisprudence, the courts recognized this conflict and started looking at how do you balance these two things out. And so they created a very complicated 4-factor balancing test. So you have to go through this whole analysis to decide, is it infringing or is it fair use? One of the shortcut approaches to finding that it's fair use is, and it's called the fair use defense, is this idea of parity. And by the way, in 1976, the Congress actually adopted that case law establishing that 4-factor test and made it a part of the copyright statute. So now it's statutory law. The parity angle basically does a shortcut to a finding of fair use if it's genuinely a parody. And I think The Princess Bride is an interesting question because the movie itself, the original movie itself, is sort of a parody, is satire, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I guess it is, isn't it?
And so this remake, I don't think this Zoom remake really is transformational. It doesn't turn it into something it wasn't. It doesn't comment on or criticize or hold up to public shame or light of any kind the original, other than to say, hey, look, we're celebrating this thing. So it's homage more than parody. But a true parody is something that's making fun of the original thing.
Yeah,
Right,
they're
so-
definitely not. Yeah, it's more of a homage to it. I was, I had heard there was going to be a remake. They were putting out rumors before COVID, and maybe they were thinking of remaking it. If they were, shame on you, don't you dare. But they, they were thinking it. I think it was in the works. And when this happened, what they did is just, it's word for word. The costumes are all made by the participants, and the sets are all, in the most part, their backyard, and then someone cut it together, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's really bizarre.
And there's a lot of that going on, and I think that is really a testament to the creative spirit and the refusal of the creative energy of people to be subdued even by a pandemic. Is we're going to do our work. We have to, as artists, create stuff. And in a sense, it is a commentary on the pandemic and a commentary on the Zoom as a technology and a medium. But is it really a parody? Probably not in that sense. But the seminal copyright law case that the Supreme Court decided was when Two Live Crew did their version of Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's a fairly coarse rendition of the Pretty Woman concept. And the Orbison folks sued, and the Supreme Court said, nope, that's fair use. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's a parody, and it's fair use.
Because it was, wow.
The song was making as much fun of the sort of sweet vanilla flavor of the Roy Orbison song by holding it up to ridicule.
Right. So that works.
Yeah. But one important thing about parody is that if you're making fun of something other than the original work, it's not a parody. It's something else. It may still be fair use, but you don't get to take the shortcut.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Wow. It gets complicated.
It is.
It's complicated. That's why it's good to hire a lawyer if you run into any of these problems in real life.
Like the sound of that.
So I've probably taken enough of your time. I'm going to wrap this up real quick before I wrap it up, because someone asked me recently about microphones. What is that microphone you're using? And we did this off the air, but I'll just do it for anyone still listening. You are using the new Shure MV7, which is the probably one of the nicer USB and XLR mics, right?
Yeah, it is I would call it the little brother to the mic you're using, which is the Shure SM7B, which is the longtime classic radio microphone. And Shure saw the writing on the wall with podcast. I think they came to the game a little late, actually, with podcasting, and they decided they needed to make something that works both with the traditional studio equipment like mixers and amplifiers and things, but also that could plug directly in via USB. And I think they hit it out of the park with this one. It sounds good, looks good, and the software backend for it gives it a lot of flexibility as well. So if you're starting out in podcasting and you've got more than the $100 budget to spend on a microphone, spend the $250 for the MV7. It's fantastic.
It's a great mic. It's funny, they did come late to the party, but I think they're making up for it.
Yeah,
because it looks like they're getting those out into the world pretty easily.
Yeah.
All right. So this has been Were You Still Talking? This is Joel Albrecht, and on my show today, I have had Gordon Firemark. I am pronouncing that right.
Yes,
indeed.
indeed.
It's just like it says, the podcast lawyer, which if you're watching the video, you might have noticed. It's right at his mic stand. Really good marketing. You can also go to his website. There's all kinds of really good media there that he's going to be doing you're going to be doing free online courses, right? I signed up for an online course. So that's coming up. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've got one that's sort of in the beta stage of development, and some folks have already enrolled, and we're building it out as we go. And it's called Easy Legal for Podcasters, and it'll be reopening to a wider audience of the public podcasting community in early March.
Early March. Nice. And this is all of this will be in the show notes, but GordonFiremark.com. Is there another? That's the place to go. All right.
GordonFiremark.com.
Fantastic. Thank you again for coming on the show. This has been fun. I actually am fascinated by law. I don't know if everyone is, but I find it really fascinating. And entertainment law is, I've read whole books on, I forgot the name of the book. There was one that was kind of a must-read. I've been a musician for a long time, and there was one like 20 years ago.
You need to know about the music industry.
That's the one.
By Donald Passman.
Yes.
Now an older statesman. He's not that old, but he's one of the older statesmen in the music industry law. And a genuinely nice man and smart as a whip. And
great stories in that book. So he makes the law. He explains it very easy, very very easy to read. If you're interested in music law, or if you're into the industry, it might be interesting to you. Still relevant, I am sure, although they seem to change. Laws change fast, especially today with new media. So thanks so much for listening. Be sure and share it with your friends anywhere you want on any of the new media places. Maybe not Parler. That's going to be hard to find. Thanks again. Be good to each other. And also, be good to yourself. And that's it. That's a wrap.
Awesome. That was a fun conversation, Joel. Thank you.